They are not attempting to annihilate you. If outright destruction was their goal, they would have selected brute force. What they pursue is far more economical. Entry. Entry into your feelings, your reflexes, your rhythm, your internal equilibrium. Machiavelli cautioned that the deadliest adversary is not the one who strikes, but the one who watches. Watching converts your conduct into their blueprint. The instant your responses become legible, your next decisions are no longer your own. Most individuals assume adversaries are driven by malice. That assumption is their blindfold. Adversaries operate from precision. They needle not to wound, but to calibrate. They postpone not from fear, but to clock the speed of your unraveling. They stay quiet not from impotence, but to observe how loudly you crack under strain. In Machiavellian language, each emotional flare is an involuntary disclosure. It betrays stance, fragility, and hunger for dominance. Authority evaporates the second you turn decipherable. The second your rage arrives on cue, your justifications appear on request, and your feelings settle into foreseeable cycles. You cease to be dangerous. Machiavelli grasped that people are not subdued by violence only, but by anticipation. When your foe can forecast your next step, opposition becomes redundant. They simply shepherd you toward conclusions you imagine were your idea. That is why countless people are defeated without ever noticing they were inside a contest. They mistake reaction for power, justification for virtue, articulation for assurance. In truth, reacting locks you into someone else's cadence, defending ratifies their narrative, talking supplies raw data. Machiavelli declared that real command rests with those who resist simple decoding. Vagueness is not disorder. It is armor. This presentation is not here to uplift or affirm your worth. It exists to teach calculated obscurity. It exists to seal emotional entry points so hermetically that adversaries must maneuver blind. When input vanishes, conviction crumbles. When conviction crumbles, blunders multiply. The adversary escalates not because you intimidate them, but because comprehension has evaporated. Machiavelli never prescribed chasing affection or equity in contests for supremacy. He prescribed mastery of how you are perceived, detachment from reflex, and sovereignty over tempo. He recognized that those who hurry to be understood forfeit edge, and those who hunger for finality hand over advantage. The psyche that insists on being comprehended is simple to govern. The psyche that withholds becomes sovereign. By the conclusion of this presentation, you will not feel energized. You will feel fortified. You will recognize how adversaries probe effective limits, how quiet operates as force, how postponement reorders rank, and why withholding resolution unravels even the most self-assured rivals. This is not about prevailing in disputes or overpowering individuals. It is about rendering yourself tactically inaccessible. Drop this affirmation in the comments before we continue. I am unreadable. Number 1. Adversaries target effective dominion, not frontal warfare. Adversaries seldom pursue naked confrontation because naked force is costly. It unmasks purpose, ignites pushback, and summons repercussions. Machiavelli noted that shrewd opponents favor persuasion over collision. They seek to channel conduct while evading accountability. Effective penetration accomplishes this in stealth. Once they inhabit your emotional territory, direct opposition becomes superfluous. They can pilot you. Their primary aim is never triumph. It is consent. Consent to unsettle your core harmony. Consent to color your disposition. Consent to indirectly sculpt your judgments. Irritants serve as skeleton keys. A comment, a pause, a look, a retreat. Each one is fine-tuned to test whether it can fracture your inner architecture. The instant emotion answers, access is granted. Thereafter they cease speculating. They begin fine-tuning. Rank is not forged through overpowering alone. It is forged through regulation of effective current. Whoever directs the emotional stream dictates the architecture of the encounter. The moment you turn agitated, guarded, hasty, or desperate to dispel misapprehension, you forfeit autonomous choice. You now operate inside architecture drawn by another. Machiavelli comprehended that sway reaches maximum strength when the target believes their conduct is self-generated. Most misread provocation. They assume its purpose is humiliation. Its purpose is reconnaissance. Emotional surges expose vulnerabilities. Tranquil intervals expose anticipations. Abrupt outbursts expose dependencies. These markers compile a psychological cartography. Once charted, steering becomes economical. Repeated assault becomes unnecessary. The adversary simply activates the confirmed trigger. Machiavelli remarked, "Men are so straightforward and so eager to satisfy pressing desires that a cunning operator will never run short of prey." Affective hungers manufacture compliance. The craving for esteem, comprehension, or vindication turns into a handle. When those cravings stand exposed, they can be manipulated without violence. The adversary no longer requires direct engagement. They need only ignite the appropriate inner echo. Dominion rarely shouts. It flows through cadence. Who initiates speech? Who lingers? Who accelerates? Who elucidates? Who flinches? These minute displacements establish precedents. Whoever fractures affective poise first unconsciously accepts subordinate rank. From that instant, parity vanishes. One side investigates, the other calibrates. One side steers, the other conforms. That is why effective discipline is not mere suppression. It is fortification. When feelings remain sealed, leverage evaporates. Absent leverage, adversaries are compelled toward transparency. They must either erupt visibly or retreat, both alternate. Ives unveil them. Machiavelli counseled princes to shun reliance on effective reciprocity because reliance summons domination. Self-sufficiency, even when mute, generates disorientation. Once you internalize that adversaries hunt effective supremacy rather than battle, your conduct transforms. You cease answering aggravation. You cease rectifying misreadings. You cease unpacking intent. You watch. You permit tension to hang without resolution. The adversary, starved of echo, starts doubting their standing. Unease supplants certainty. Momentum falters. The decisive pivot is understanding that effective neutrality is not surrender. It is rejection. Rejection of placement, rejection of quantification, rejection of supplying ammunition. When feelings are off limits, strategic command disintegrates. The adversary no longer confronts a human. They confront an obstacle. Drop this affirmation in the comments. My emotions are inaccessible. Number 2. Reject response to dismantle their leverage. Response is never innocent. The moment you answer, you yield the first move. Machiavelli realized power resides with the one who moves from volition, not reflex. Responding inserts you into a framework you did not author. It compels motion on terms settled before you perceive the contest existed. The instant you respond, you ratify significance. You broadcast that external elements possess jurisdiction over your inner condition. Every reply leaks data. Inflection discloses waiting. Velokshi, thank you, discloses desperation. Language discloses design. Quiet after stimulus signals fortitude. Articulation signals contour. Adversaries scrutinize these markers because they erase ambiguity. Ambiguity threatens them. Legibility protects them. When you respond, you simplify their arithmetic. You prune their branching paths. You compress nuance into forecast. Whoever replies first structurally occupies inferior ground. This is not sociology. It is physics of interaction. Reply signals accommodation. Accommodation signals reliance. True command never narrates itself live. Sovereignty never hurries to dispel doubt. Machiavelli observed that frantic defense projects culpability even when blameless, because haste betrays disequilibrium. Equilibrium underpins supremacy. Most assume response proves assurance. In reality, it proves permeability. Permeability grants entry. Entry grants steering. When someone masters the precise trigger for your reply, they set your tempo. They can fatigue you. They can reroute you. Response surrenders the controls. From that instant, you are no longer steering. You are compensating. Refusal to reply fractures the entire apparatus. When no echo returns, the adversary is abandoned without validation. Their premises stay hypothetical. Their pressure drifts unattached. This vacuum breeds unease because dominion demands confirmation. Absent confirmation, assurance erodes. The adversary begins doubting sequence, significance, and efficacy. Their certainty frays, not because you struck, but because you abstained. Machiavellian strength frequently appears inert to the unschooled observer. In practice, it is discriminating participation. Non-reaction is not apathy, it is rigor. It is deliberate denial of ingress. When you withhold reply, you are not evading confrontation, you are compelling it to implode from its own mass. Provocation demands co-authorship. Absent co-authorship, the provocateur stands naked. Non-response also inverts the psychic load. Instead of you processing affect, they process indeterminacy. Quiet turns reflective. They project agenda. They fabricate designs. They populate voids with dread. This self-generated turbulence breeds excess. Excess breeds miscalculation. Machiavelli understood adversaries self-destruct when clarity is withheld. Disarray summons fault faster than opposition ever could. Abstaining from response also safeguards inner sovereignty. You stay anchored, your judgments remain unhurried. Your conduct stays intentional. This gap between trigger and conduct forms the nucleus of supremacy. When conduct springs from purpose rather than reflex, authority coalesces organically. No proclamation required. Command manifests through pattern, not spectacle. Another outcome adversaries seldom foresee. When responses vanish, engagement wanes. Manipulation requires consequence. Absent consequence, exertion appears futile. The adversary either erupts transparently or disengages completely. Both conclusions serve you. Eruption unmasks design. Disengagement admits erosion of sway. In either scenario, leverage collapses. Machiavelli cautioned that exposing internal gears invites tampering. Response unveils mechanism. Stillness conceals it. The immovable cannot be maneuvered. That is why refusal to respond is not frailty. It is shielding. It inserts separation between you and outside strain. Separation generates latitude. Latitude generates autonomy. Supremacy commences when response terminates. Number 3. Wield silence as deliberate psychic strain. Silence is routinely mistaken for vacancy. In truth, it is concentrated force without vector. Machiavelli comprehended that the unlabeled incites dread, and the dreaded acquires mass. Silence eliminates landmarks. Absent verbal marker, absent effective hint, absent observable purpose, the opposing psyche is driven inward. The strain never dissipates, it intensifies. Articulation relieves pressure. Silence sustains it. Adversaries depend on relief because relief re-establishes grip. Even momentary speech anchors narrative. Persistent silence unleashes narrative drift. The adversary assigns significance where none was supplied. That significance is molded by their own fragility, not your design. Their asymmetry is born. Silence acts as kinetic force because it blocks alignment. Without alignment, sequencing fractures. Adversaries pause, misstep forward, or exit prematurely. Every miscalculation betrays reliance on echo. Machiavelli discerned that indeterminacy fractures resolve more rapidly than resistance. A legible adversary can be anticipated, an illegible one cannot. Communication contains its own ranking. Frequent speakers are reacting. Final speakers define actuality. Perpetual silence exists beyond the arena. Silence elevates you above transaction. You cease participating. You become the observed object. That shift relocates weight. The observed grows reflexive. The observer assumes centrality. Machiavelli stated, "Whoever empowers another destroys himself." Silence denies empowerment over you. When you provide nothing, no benefit can be harvested. When you withhold rationale, no handle forms. Silence interrupts the unconscious handover of authority that speech routinely executes. The human psyche abhors unresolved arcs. It pursues terminus. Silence engineers an arc without terminus. That perpetual incompletion generates psychic static. Inquiries loop. Premises proliferate. The adversary becomes consumed not by deed but by decoding. While they labor to manufacture interpretation, you stand motionless. This psychic strain escalates autonomously. Silence requires no booster. It accrues naturally. The longer it endures, the more oppressive it grows. Adversaries may initially diagnose it as frailty. That diagnosis evaporates when no disintegration follows. Disarray morphs into skepticism. Skepticism morphs into apprehension. Apprehension produces exposure. Silence also dismantles effective equivalence. When one party radiates haste while the other remains motionless, disparity becomes glaring. Effective exertion without reciprocity registers as mortifying. It broadcasts reliance. The adversary, frequently below conscious awareness, registers that they expend vitality on someone who returns none. That realization corrodes assurance. Deliberate silence is not retreat, it is emplacement. You exist without transaction, approachable without entry, apparent without annotation. Such placement resists assault because it offers no face. Acts glance away. Inquiries drop unanswered. Strain ricochets to origin. Machiavelli instructed leaders to shun superfluous explication because explication summons verdict. Silence summons projection. Projection unveils the adversary's interior terrain. Their terrors emerge via conjecture. Their priorities surface via intensification. You acquire intelligence without expenditure. When silence solidifies into habit, status transforms. Others recalibrate around it. Exchanges decelerate. Anticipations realign. Your immobility becomes the fixed point. This is psychic gravitation. It never solicits focus, it commands it. Silence also preserves sequencing options. Words anchor you to instance. Silence maintains fluidity. When speech finally emerges, it lands heavier because it follows scarcity. Scarcity heightens potency. Machiavelli grasped that rarity elevates worth. Silence manufactures rarity of entry. Discipline is essential. Silence must be volitional, not effective. It is not evasion. It is rejection of nourishing indeterminacy with lucidity. Once internalized, silence becomes strain without hostility, sway without motion, command without exertion. The illegible figure becomes the gravitational center of reaction. Others circle, recalibrate, overanalyze. You remain constant. That is the supremacy of silence. Number 4. Master tempo to master conclusions. Time remains the most underappreciated lever of authority. Machiavelli recognized that whoever sets rhythm governs condu. CT. Pressure is seldom organic. It is engineered to constrict evaluation, erode discrimination, and compel hasty allegiance. When tempo is artificially accelerated, error proliferates. Those who submit to manufactured haste relinquish command before perceiving the theft. Adversaries inject velocity to shrink options. Swift verdicts feel resolute yet routinely benefit the architect. Velocity rewards prior preparation. The one who accelerates is structurally trailing. Machiavelli cautioned that reflexive motion delights opponents because it substitutes strategy with inertia. Inertia can be redirected. Purpose cannot. Postponement is not vacillation, it is fracture. When you decelerate exchange, you shatter forecast. Adversaries construct sequences around anticipated reply intervals. When those intervals implode, architecture collapses. They are compelled to linger. Lingering relocates effective mass. Expectancy breeds strain. Strain degrades lucidity. Temporal asymmetry forges rank. Whoever endures delay projects autonomy. Whoever demands immediacy exposes necessity. Necessity breeds exposure. Machiavelli discerned that genuine authority projects composure because it harbors no terror of forfeiture through pause. Dread belongs to those convinced advantage slips away without constant grip. Rejection of haste destabilizes rivals because it withholds terminus. Their blueprint remains incomplete. They clutch strain without release. As duration stretches, effective investment swells. Swollen investment clouds discrimination. Choices grow reflexive. The longer the wait, the fiercer the craving for terminus. Craving for terminus becomes leverage. Extended pauses succeeded by concise motion generate asymmetry. The pause magnifies force. When reply finally materializes, it arrives weighted. It arrives intentional. It implies deliberation, not reflex. Machiavelli grasped that impression outweighs exertion. A calibrated reply radiates supremacy irrespective of substance. Adversaries attempt tempo domination via ultimatums, imperatives, and veiled threats. These instruments rely on dread of forfeiture. When you disregard engineered timelines, you reframe stakes. Forfeiture becomes theirs. The initiative they labored to capture dissolves. Their haste unmasks dependence. Another tactical benefit lies in permitting circumstances to ripen. Premature motion discloses little. Delayed motion discloses sequences. Through patience, you harvest intelligence without disbursement. The adversary displays impatience, modulates tone, exposes priorities. Every recalibration betrays intent. Machiavelli prized patience because it permitted others to fully unmask prior to engagement. Time also safeguards placement. Instant action fixes context. Delay maintains liquidity. When conditions pivot, delayed actors retain maneuverability. Early movers must rationalize their selection. Rationalization depletes authority. Patience preserves optionality. Machiavelli observed that Princes hastened forfeited command because they appeared captive to circumstance rather than its architect. Those who delayed projected sovereignty. Sovereignty is recognized through measured rhythm. Measured rhythm broadcasts mastery over conclusion. Tempo mastery also neutralizes steering. Steering demands alignment. When alignment fractures, sway weakens. The steerer cannot synchronize pressure. Their maneuvers appear mistimed. Mistiming erodes credibility. Waiting carries psychic expense most underestimate. Waiting generates internal abrasion. Cognition loops, assurance corrodes. Adversaries begin questioning premises. Questioning breeds overcompensation. Overcompensation unveils fragility. This sequence unfolds organically without your intervention. The discipline to govern tempo demands inner anchorage. It demands tolerance of indeterminacy. Most accelerate because quiet feels intolerable. Machiavellian authority tolerates discomfort because it comprehends its utility. Transferred discomfort equals acquired leverage. When you dictate rhythm, you determine when significance emerges. You determine when motion carries weight. You determine when transaction commences. This sovereignty eliminates necessity for violence. Tempo mastery silently reconfigures encounter. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I control the pace. Number 5. Shatter adversary anticipation. Adversaries never arm for veracity. They arm for routine. Machiavelli comprehended that forecast rests on repetite. Ion, not truth. Cognition favors heuristics. Repetition carves those heuristics. Once routine is presumed, preparation grows complacent. Complacency dulls vigilance. When an adversary assumes they possess your behavioral algorithm, critical thought suspends. That suspension is the breach. Anticipation operates as script. It prescribes your reply window, your reflexive shape, your resistance contour. That script becomes their safeguard. They rest upon it unconsciously. When conduct abruptly deviates from script, bewilderment supplants assurance. Bewilderment interrupts execution. Execution fracture creates exposure. Predictability is not invariably frailty. Machiavelli never endorsed perpetual disorder. He endorsed command. Certain intervals permit consistency to lower suspicion and friction. Consistency can serve as concealment. Hazard emerges when consistency hardens into identity. Once conduct is presumed immutable, exploitation becomes mechanical. The adversary ceases adaptation. They recycle prior successes. Shattering anticipation is not arbitrariness. Arbitrariness lacks purpose. Deliberate divergence is surgical. It strikes at apex pressure points, not indiscriminately. When strain crests and habitual reply is awaited, divergence delivers maximum shock. The adversary commits based on premise. When premise collapses, they freeze. Freezing fractures velocity. Machiavelli remarked, "A prince ought to avoid departing from virtue when feasible, yet must know how to embrace ice when necessity compels." That was not ethical counsel, it was tactical elasticity. The principle is plasticity under duress. When anticipation rigidifies conduct, plasticity becomes supremacy. Adversaries also forecast effective trajectory. They anticipate irritation, justification, withdrawal, or intensification. When none manifest, their framework implodes. They must reconstruct comprehension mid-transaction. Reconstruction consumes bandwidth. Bandwidth diverted from execution breeds error. That is how anticipation failure converts to advantage. Being incorrect carries psychic penalty. When adversary projection fails, skepticism emerges. Skepticism weakens subsequent projections. Assurance degrades gradually. Once skepticism roots, even accurate premises feel suspect. That instability persists. A single fractured anticipation contaminates future encounters. Deliberate inconsistency also fractures manipulation. Manipulation requires dependable stimulus response. When response ceases to align, sway erodes. The manipulator loses calibration. They overcorrect. Overcorrection unmasks agenda. Unmasking eliminates finesse. Machiavelli grasped that projecting simplicity while harboring complexity is authority. Adversaries relax when comprehension seems achieved. That relaxation endangers them. When complexity surfaces unexpectedly, reaction latency collapses. They are forced into cognition under duress rather than fluid execution. Anticipation also regulates escalation gradient. Adversaries calibrate depth according to projected resistance. When resistance abruptly mutates or vanishes, escalation misfires. They overshoot or undershoot. Both misjudgments create opening. Shattering anticipation requires no theatricality. Sometimes vacancy suffices. Sometimes restraint constitutes the break. Sometimes composure substitutes ferocity. Sometimes postponement substitutes velocity. Contrast is decisive. Greater divergence between forecast and actuality amplifies psychic shock. A deeper consequence follows. When adversaries lose predictive footing, caution overtakes them. Caution decelerates initiative. Initiative erosion transfers supremacy. They linger, they waver, they surveil rather than advance. In that suspension, control relocates. Machiavelli prized plasticity because brittle minds shatter under flux. Plasticity keeps authority ambulatory. Ambulatory authority evades capture. When conduct resists mapping, blueprint remains forever unfinished. The adversary exists in perpetual draft. Anticipation is comfort. Eradicating it manufactures disequilibrium. Disequilibrium weakens scaffolding. Scaffolding collapse terminates supremacy. By governing timing and method of anticipation fracture, you dictate psychic landscape. The instant the adversary grasps, they no longer decode you. Equilibrium tilts. They no longer contest the prepared arena. They react to one they cannot name. Number 6. Withhold resolution to fracture mental anchorage. The human psyche resists incomplete stories. Machiavelli comprehended this principle centuries before psychology labeled it. Resolution is craved because it reinstalls coherence. When coherence is withheld, strain persists. That persistent strain devours focus, depletes vitality, and warps discernment. Withholding resolution is not malice, it is tactical disengagement from psychic commerce. Adversaries seldom pursue pure conquest, frequently they pursue explication. They seek acknowledgement, echo, or validation. Any termination reassures them that sway endures. When you sever access without rationale, the circuit remains live. A live circuit is not benign. It drags attention inward repetitively. The adversary replays sequences, hunting significance that was never planted. Rage consumes rapidly. Disarray lingers. Rage expels energy. Indeterminacy imprisons it. Machiavelli grasped that retribution can conclude strife, yet ambiguity extends supremacy. Absent clear terminus, cognition labors long after interaction ceases. This extended labor profits only the absent party. Resolution also reinstalls rank. When you explicate, vindicate, or illuminate, you implicitly ratify the other's jurisdiction to evaluate. That ratification elevates them. Withholding resolution revokes elevation. It silently communicates that their comprehension is superfluous. Superfluity wounds deeper than antagonism. Silence following interaction differs from silence preceding it. Post-interaction absence feels purposeful. It feels conclusive without annotation. That duality is potent. It engineers a vacuum where significance belongs. The adversary populates the vacuum with self-authored stories. Those stories frequently turn self-directed. Skepticism supplants certainty. Machiavelli discerned that resolution cravers are easily steered. They pursue answers. They expose desperation via persistence. Each renewed access attempt broadcasts necessity. Necessity inverts supremacy. Whoever craves resolution already occupies lower ground. Temptation exists to conclude matters tidily, to seal dialogues, unpack intent, dispel misreadings. That temptation springs from compassion, not tactic. Machiavellian authority resists it because lucidity profits recipient more than sender. When lucidity is withheld, leverage endures. Once resolution is denied, uniformity becomes vital. A solitary explication annihilates the mechanism. Cognition resets. The circuit closes, command evaporates. Denial must be total and sustained. Partial resolution reignites pursuit. Absolute denial terminates silently. Unterminated situations breed fixation. Fixation contracts perception. Contracted perception breeds misjudgment. Adversaries begin reading unrelated signals as messages. They hyperanalyze. They misinterpret neutrality as agenda. This warping diminishes effective action elsewhere. Their attention misallocates. Machiavelli grasped that authority requires no presence. It requires residue. Withholding resolution sustains resi. Due without exertion. The adversary continues solitary engagement. You remain unaffected. This asymmetry constitutes supremacy. Denial also furnishes protection. By refusing explication, you shield internal calculus. Purpose stays confidential. Design stays veiled. Veiling prevents counter-design. What resists decoding resists anticipation. Resolution also generates effective discharge. Discharge enables progression. Denial imprisons affect. Imprisoned affect seeks breach. Breach frequently manifests as intensification, excess, or exposure. Each manifestation discloses excess. Each weakens stance. Neutrality is often misread as indifference. In tactic, neutrality is shielding. It removes motive. Absent motive, steering collapses. The adversary stalls internally. Machiavelli counseled princes to retract favor without rationale, because rationale summons opposition. Silence terminates bargaining. Denial terminates chase. When resolution is inaccessible, transaction eventually halts, yet not before asymmetry has completed its labor. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I owe no closure. Number 7. Attain psychic invulnerability. The ultimate expression of supremacy is not collision, it is detachment. Machiavelli comprehended that maximal command arrives when influence becomes impotent. Psychic invulnerability is not worldly withdrawal, it is immunity to perturbation. When external vectors no longer redirect inner trajectory, authority solidifies. At this plateau, identity achieves internal completeness. Conduct no longer seeks ratification. Judgment no longer awaits sanction. Action flows from architecture, not trigger. Adversaries register the shift instantly. Conventional instruments lose purchase. Irritants land inert. Postponement produces no tremor. Intensification yields no displacement. Absent echo, sway expires. Invulnerability rewrites dynamics without declaration. Lack of reflex communicates irreversibility. No strain exists to exploit, no effect to penetrate, no forecast to shatter. This immobility is not inert, it is concluded. Machiavelli discerned that the apparently unmoved cannot be administered because administration demands accommodation. Accommodation demands motion. When adversaries lose entry, they frequently amplify force. That amplification is not potency, it is diminishing relevance. They press harder because conventional markers vanished. Their conduct becomes conspicuous. Conspicuousness eliminates edge. The silent figure becomes the orienting point. Others merely surround. Psychic invulnerability also eradicates inner discord. When purpose is internally lucid, external static loses potency. Disarray fades. Lucidity crystallizes. Lucidity generates uniformity. Uniformity reinforces command. Command requires no assertion. It is perceived through tranquil presence. Machiavelli grasped that authority persists when uncontested. Contestation invites unveiling. Withdrawal from contest eliminates the arena entirely. When you vanish from the adversary's calculus, they cannot prevail or fail against you. They simply lose pertinence. This plateau also conserves vitality. Transaction consumes resources. Invulnerability preserves them. While others react, explicate, and fortify, you advance. Advancement becomes non-reciprocal. Separation widens silently. The distance turns unbridgeable. Misconception exists that invulnerability demands effective deadening. It demands discrimination. Effect persists, yet remains unavailable for external deployment. It stays proprietary. Propriety is authority. What remains proprietary resists instrumentalization. Machiavellian supremacy is routinely mistaken for belligerence. In reality, it is disciplined restraint informed by comprehension. Comprehension eliminates haste. Haste summons fault. When haste vanishes, exactness supplants it. Exactness sculpts conclusions. Adversaries eventually abandon influence attempts because exertion yields zero return. Silence meets pressure. Immobility meets intensification. Absence meets incursion. The investment-return equation implodes. Absent return, expenditure terminates. Sway atrophies. Psychic invulnerability also reconfigures self-conception. Assurance no longer requires external buttress. Potency no longer seeks exhibition. Composure supplants friction. This internal congruence radiates externally. Others register it without explication. Regard follows organically. Machiavelli cautioned that dependence on external ratificat. Ion maintains vulnerability. Dependence creates entry. Entry invites administration. Invulnerability severs that linkage. Once severed, reconnection requires permission. Permission is never extended. At this elevation, strife concludes prior to ignition. Influence attempts expire silently. The adversary does not register defeat, they register disconnection. Disconnection is terminal. Nothing remains to dispute, to needle, to access. This constitutes the supreme triumph Machiavelli implied, though seldom articulated explicitly. Not supremacy via violence, not victory via spectacle, but liberation from steering, liberation from reflex, liberation from psychic reach. Upon reaching this plateau, you no longer require victory. You have exited the game. Authority rarely resides in acquisition. It resides in what cannot be acquired. Machiavelli comprehended this centuries earlier. Most pursue sway as though it were trophy. They dispute, explicate, vindicate, and exhaust themselves, chasing command that was never theirs to grasp. Authentic mastery reverses the vector. It is impermeability. It is emplacement so anchored that disturbance attempts collapse prior to launch. The adversary circles you. You do not circle them. Sway is not captured, it is refused. Triumph is not measured by adversary collapse, but by your immunity to collapse. When your psyche becomes invulnerable, irritants lose relevance. Rage, dread, or craving cannot displace you because anchorage is internal. Your identity, your selections, your reflexes belong exclusively to you. That is why Machiavelli insisted rulers must never display fragility. Fragility invites probing. Potency conceals itself behind tranquility. The invulnerable psyche is illegible, immovable, impregnable. Every mechanism presented in this presentation builds toward this condition. Rejecting reflex, mastering silence, governing tempo, shattering anticipation, withholding resolution. These are not instruments for prevailing in disputes or subjugating others. They are instruments for excising yourself from the equation altogether. Whoever cannot be steered, forecasted, or irritated functions above the arena. Their triumphs remain unseen yet total. They direct without displacement, sway without exertion, and persist untouched while reality revolves. You require no justification, no explication, no demonstration. Ratification is superfluous. Sanction is redundant. The ultimate authority manifests when transaction becomes elective, never mandatory. When the adversary intensifies, they unveil themselves. When they linger, they expose reliance. In both instances, your emplacement endures. Silence, immobility, and deliberate restraint constitute the supreme arsenal. They demand rigor, endurance, and comprehension. Apply these principles and transformation becomes evident. Others will misjudge your vectors. Provocation attempts will misfire. Effective snares will lose potency. You will advance unencumbered, cognize with clarity, act with intention. Strife no longer governs you. You govern its framework. This is not subjugation. It is emancipation. Before we conclude, if this presentation held value, like, share, and subscribe. Drop the affirmation in the comments below. I am untouchable. Each repetition fortifies mental armor. Authority is not located in what you dismantle. It is located in what cannot reach you. When influence terminates, strife terminates. When strife terminates, liberty commences. Be untouchable, be calculated, be imperceptible. And remember, the supreme triumph is not vanquishing adversaries. It is rendering yourself unreachable.